Good evening. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Board of Education. The Board of Education is joining back. We are coming back from closed session, which started at 6 p.m. this evening. We had two posted topics on this agenda for closed session: employment of employee, collective negotiations. We also discussed actual potential litigation. There are no action items coming out of closed session this evening. We will have a roll call by Mrs. Walsh.
Ms. Hirsch?
Here.
Ms. Davy?
Present.
Mrs. Ostachik?
Here.
Minister Collins?
Here.
Mrs. Droney?
Here.
Ms. Conroy? Mr. Carlquist?
Here.
Thank you. 7 board members present, none absent. Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Our agenda tonight starts with one of our, as board members, one of our favorite things that we like to have is student recognition. Dr. Krizik, would you like to give an introduction?
We frequently are celebrating the arts at the board table, and tonight is another opportunity for us to celebrate the accomplishment of our music students, but not at the high school level this month, but at the middle school level. There was recently the Illinois Music Educators Association Junior Festival selectees with students representing each of the 3 middle schools: Bryan Middle School, Churchville Middle School, and Sandburg Middle School. It's now my honor and pleasure to introduce to you our K-8 music coordinator, Brian Berg, who will share with you the accomplishments of these individuals and then introduce them. Mr. Berg.
Thank you, Dr. Krizik. Good evening, members of the board, members of the Elmhurst staff, and members of the Elmhurst community. On behalf of the Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205 Music Department, it is my privilege and honor to introduce the Illinois Music Educators Association Junior Festival participants for the 2009-2010 school year. Each year, the Illinois Music Educators Association hosts the Junior Festival event for middle school students who excel in woodwind, brass, percussion, and string instruments, and voice. Students audition to participate in the festival band, orchestra, choir, and jazz band. Selected students then spend a morning and an afternoon rehearsing together in one of these 4 ensembles under the direction of a distinguished conductor, clinician, music educator, and present a joint concert in the afternoon. Similar IMEA junior festivals are held in 9 separate regions of the state. Hundreds of students from across the Chicago-Joliet region auditioned in early October for the opportunity to perform in the IMEA Reed District 1 Junior Festival, which was held on Saturday, November 7th, 2009 at Lincoln Way High School in Frankfort, Illinois. The 3 ensembles presented an outstanding joint performance in the early evening for a packed field house at Lincoln Way. I'm very proud to present the following Elmhurst 205 students who were selected into the IMEA Region 1 Junior Festival Honor Band, Orchestra, Choir, and Jazz Band. If you'd come up as I read your name, please. Analia Fowler. These students are from Bryan. Mary Margaret Koch. Maddie Walenga. Wes Nelson. Sydney Meyer, Matt Bindeman, Haley Goulding. From Sandburg Middle School, Rachel Iverson, Paul Salamaka, Madison Knight, Crosby Muth, Brian Wise, Lauren Gaynor, Annalise Dorff, Clara Stazowski, Hannah Widmeyer. From Churchville Middle School, Emily Drost, Jessica Hines, Cass Ali, Callie Fitzgerald, Billy Whitstock, and Noah Wagner. In addition to recognizing these fine students and fine performers, I'd like to also invite our music staff to stand who joined us this evening. From the middle schools, Churchville, Cindy Krause, Barbara Scott, whose orchestra was actually invited to perform at the state convention this year in Peoria. Lindsay Deanna. From Sandburg Middle School, Rico Vasquez, Heather Knight, Stephanie Ferraci, John Gaunt. And from Bryan Middle School, Ellen Gary, Jessica Cross, and myself.
Thank you. And we don't we haven't had a lot of recognitions from the middle school. Usually our recognitions are the end result of the music program or the academic program when the kids get to high school. So I think it's great to be able to see our very talented students that hopefully most of you will be coming through our high school program. I think it's also important to thank our parents for the support they give, because in the middle school program, it's early mornings for the students, so the parents often have to get the kids there early, the teachers are there early. And then for you students, the additional work you had to do to try out for this program, and also all the practices you had to do. So from the board, we are thrilled to have wonderful, talented students like you in our district. We celebrate your success, and we hopefully you'll continue to move on in our music program through the high school. And with that, I would like to read a proclamation. Because the Illinois Music Educators Association Junior Festival recognizes middle school students for their accomplishments, and because this program encourages excellence on the part of individual students and encourages further music study and artistry, and because Bryan Middle School students Brian Vindeman, cello, Analia Fowler, bassoon, Haley Goulding, alto vocal, Mary Margaret Koch, violin, Sydney Meyer, cello, Wes Nelson, double bass, and Maddie Walenga, violin. And because Churchville Middle School students Kais Ali, tenor vocal, Emily Dross, soprano vocal, Callie Fitzgerald, spring bass, Jessica Hines, alto vocal, Noah Wagner, trumpet, Billy Woodstock, French horn, and because Sandburg Middle School students Annalise Dorff, cello, Lauren Gaynor, flute, Rachel Iverson, trumpet, Madison Knight, clarinet, Crosby Muth, euphonium, Paul Salamanca, clarinet, Clara Stazowski, soprano vocal, Hannah Widmeyer, soprano vocal, and Brian Weiss, percussion, were selected to play in an honor ensemble with some of the most accomplished music students in the region. And because these accomplishments bring pride and prestige to Bryan, Churchville, and Sandburg Middle Schools, to District 205, and to our community, now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education and Administration of Elmhurst Community District 205 extend our congratulations to these outstanding students. Thank you. I also have some plaques for the 3 middle schools, so if I can have the staff come up, I can give you your plaques to take back to your schools. Thank you again, students, for coming out and celebrating with us and your families. We would love if you'd like to stay for the business part of the meeting. We'll take a couple minutes break for those people that would like to gather your families. I'm sure lots of you have homework tonight, too. Okay, we're going to go ahead and continue on with our meeting. Our next item on our agenda is public comment. I have 4 individuals that have been signed up to address the board. When I call your name, if you could come up here and turn on the microphone and address your comments to the board. And please restrict your comments to 3 minutes. We have a timer light up there that'll help you keep track of it. When it turns yellow, you're pretty much out of time. I will cut you off after 3 minutes. We have a busy agenda tonight as usual, so we need to make sure we manage our time tightly. The first speaker is Ed O'Connor.
I'm Jennifer Sutter. I'm a 6th grade science teacher at Sandburg Middle School, and I live in Villa Park. In late September, we were presented with the timeline for developing the K-12 science roadmap and the adopting a new middle school science program. At that time, the teachers at Sandburg, all of whom were involved in the last adoption, immediately recognized the impossible task of completing this work by the end of the school year. We made our concerns about the aggressive timeline and flawed process known. However, the process continued. As concerned and caring teachers, we continued our involvement with the process. Even though it did not make sense to evaluate science programs in November when our content topics would not be decided until the end of January, a member of our staff participated in this process. 2 Sandburg teachers were involved in developing the K-12 science roadmap and sequencing the content topics, myself included. We felt it our professional obligation and desire to be involved. Curriculum reform should be developed around powerful, meaningful goals. Since our main tools for building our curriculum were the Project 2061 maps and the national standards, we did look at powerful, meaningful goals. I agree and support this part of the process. However, the next step of aligning the district's entire science curriculum based on the distribution of ISAT questions was not the best way to sequence our content topics. As the process continued, last month we took time to evaluate 4 programs in the hopes of finding a publisher that best fits the content goals identified through the road mapping process. With limited direction, we evaluated the publishers. Learning that our evaluations were simply averaged together to rank each program was another red flag flaw in this process. Now here we are. If the adoption of the Pearson program is approved, we are faced with the huge task of writing curriculum for each of the 3 units per grade level by the end of July. Please know that as teachers write curriculum, assessments for Pearson are not available. In addition, Pearson has not yet completed their technology component of the program either. This deadline, minus these 2 huge components of the program, does not allow adequate time for us to write meaningful, effective, high-quality curriculum our students deserve and District 205 is known for. Like I said, in September, we recognize that this is not how a coherent district-wide science curriculum should be developed or how a middle school textbook program should be adopted. I agree that every science teacher had the opportunity to be involved in each step of the process, and we were involved. However, I'm presenting this tonight because I want it known that our involvement did not represent our support of the process. Our involvement merely produced the results and answers that were required from administration. I'd like to end on a positive note. Without a doubt, I can assure you that every Sandburg science teacher recognizes that we play one of the most critical roles in our students' learning and success. So no program, good or bad, changes this belief or our role. So come August, we will be prepared like always with much energy and excitement to make a difference in the lives of our students. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So is our next speaker Mr. O'Connor?
Sorry about that. Yes, I'm Ed O'Connor. I come to this meeting not only as a teacher in the district, but as well as a parent. I went to Elmhurst College. I'm a transplant from Springfield. Graduated in 93, a brief stint in Berkeley. I moved back in 94 and have raised 3 kids, sort of. They're currently in District 205 right now, participating in the program that we're discussing. So I have a little more involved than just a teacher in the process. We were asked to find the potential new textbook for middle school for the purpose of better preparing the students for high school. The high school was in the process of reconfiguring their curriculum for the benefit of their students as well. We should always want to improve what we are offering to students, but based on the process that was used, I do not know if that is going to happen. From the beginning, we realized that the time frame given was not adequate to put together a proper textbook adoption. Who has taught these programs before? What lab materials are we going to need for the different programs? Is it the best program to prepare the kids for high school? All questions that were asked, but never given answers to. We reviewed the materials in November without the knowledge of what subjects we were going to be teaching. Road mapping, which should have happened first, was being done simultaneously to figure out what needs to be taught at each grade level. Again, we were saying that this was not enough time to properly pick a text. We still did not have the information as to what had to be taught and where, or if it had ever been taught in the classroom at all. We did not have access to the technology aspect in November, and still are waiting to use the technology of Pearson that is promised to be done by June. What are the lab material costs going to be? Who is going to purchase these? Will it be the schools or will it be the district? What materials are going to be available? More questions than answers. Are we doing what is best for the students? Will this better prepare the middle school student for high school? As a taxpayer, am I getting the most for my money when the district is financially strapped? And most importantly, as a parent, are we getting the best program for my child? With adequate time, these questions would have been answered. With the process that was in place, I cannot answer those now.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mike Ruzich.
Okay, sorry. Dr. Krizik, board members, fellow attendees. I'm Mike Ruzich. I don't reside in the district, but I have taught science at Sandburg for the past 17 plus years. I'd like to begin by saying I've considered a privilege to teach in Elmhurst District 205. The past couple of weeks, I've thought, what really makes this district a district so great in which to work? And it's the parents. Parents who nurture their children's interests, provide academic support, and positive feedback to the direction of their children's future. The parents' ability to give is so much more here than in other districts so close to Elmhurst. The parents deserve to have more information upon which to assist their children's academic development. So much of that future is clouded by standardized testing. I've heard board members in this very room discuss, is this the direction we want to go, or do we want enriched curriculums? Almost our entire middle school science curriculum has been realigned based on a small number of standardized test questions. This in itself is no big deal because the modular curriculum which we now use, which we've only used for 4 years, was chosen with the idea that realignment might occur. Apparently, we have adopted a new modular text series. I'll not go into the selection process, as this has or will be covered by others. The point I want to make clear is that the new curriculum provides no distinct advantage over our present curriculum. From what I have heard, no one else has used it. It's unproven. Most of the target schools we've looked at, from what I've heard, use the text we now use or another that was not part of our selection process. Again, from the information that has been given to me, as an 8th grade science teacher, I won't be able to use anywhere from 1/3 to 2/3 of this new curriculum for the 2010-11 school year because incoming 8th graders have already studied what is now designated for 8th grade subject matter or have not had the material and must have it covered in preparation for high school. For the 2011-12 year, I won't be able to use 1/3 of the new curriculum for the same reason. This means in the next 2 years, comparatively speaking, I'll still use the old text because I won't be able to use the new bought and paid for text for what amounts to anywhere from 2/3 to an entire year. Why don't we use this time period to choose a test sequence that will best benefit our students rather than spend money on something we can only use in parts? By that time, the dust will have settled and we can sequence subject matter appropriately. At a time when the district is hurting for money, why spend money on a curriculum that, one, provides no distinct advantage, and many of us believe the text sequence we now use is the better choice? Two, after spending the money, we won't be able to use the entire sequence for 2 more years. And 3, is this a wise expenditure of district money when student programs and staff members are being reduced? Thank you.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Gina Cook.
Need to push something? I'm good. Hi, I'm Gina Cook. I reside in the district. I have 2 children who have graduated from the district. I started here at the beginning of the process back in the fall when we had decided that we were going to expedite the timeline for this. I am here at the end to say to adopt this is no longer, I would not classify it as not prudent, I would classify it as a travesty, that we would spend this amount of money for a program that I don't and many of us do not believe is anything better than what we have and likely possibly worse. I will ask the board, if they're in their considerations, to ask what was the goal. At the meeting where we did the final adoption, it was unclear and I was not really given an answer regarding what the goal was for this process. How is it better? What do other districts actually teach? Mike alluded to that. Where has this program been taught? Is it even finished at this point? How will students transfer, take one of the texts, the new text for 8th grade, and compare it to an honors bio or the new unidentified bio book for freshman year, and ask yourself, how will they transition from this book to the complications of an honors bio book? Would I like my 8th graders to learn what was left over after the ISAC, because the order was basically determined by the 3 years past ISAC questions, and to try to get the topics that had the most questions asked on them before March of the 7th grade, and 8th grade was what was left over. So the important year of preparing our students for their freshman year of high school is now basically the leftover. In fact, it changed what we were teaching based on each publisher because it was what was left. Does this program provide me with technology that I need? As Mike alluded to, the websites are not developed at this point. We have no assessment materials at this point. Do I want a consumable text? Not only is it not green, at the end of this period, I have nothing left. I can't choose to just continue with this because it's been consumed. And that's basically what I have to say at this point. So I would strongly recommend that this adoption not move forward. I'm with Jen in saying that I agree with the mapping process wholeheartedly. I would love to teach a program that better prepares our students for high school. I try my best to do that, and I will continue to do that with whatever materials are provided to me. Hopefully, it will be something wise that you choose. Thank you.
We're still in public comment, so if you'd like to come up, you can give your name and address.
My name is Anthony Meneses. I've been a lifelong Elmhurst resident, and I have a daughter in 4th grade at Jackson School and a son at the 1st grade at Jackson School. On March 24th, there was a half day of school, and it was scheduled on a Wednesday. And my daughter went to the playground with another friend of hers, a female, I won't mention the name, and another boy. 2 5th grade boys entered the playground and shot my daughter and these 2 kids at point blank range with BB guns on school property. When my wife called the Elmhurst police, the first thing the Elmhurst police said to her was, "There's really not much we can do about it. Are you sure you want it documented?" To which my wife said, "Yes." So I left work early that day and went over to the principal's office, and I know everybody was in a meeting, and I saw the cop there, and they were handling it, and they told me they would confiscate the guns. I am not a gun control advocate, right? All right, so here's what angers me, is that I waited 2 weeks for any feedback from the school, and then I emailed the principal. After I emailed the principal and threatened to come to the board meeting to make this incident a part of the public record, I was out of town on April 1st when the police report was published, and I'm very upset with it. I got a call at 8 in the morning from my office, so that was fine, and I understand that not all the actions of children can be prevented. What I am severely upset with is an email that was sent out after work today to all the Jackson parents, and I've got it on my smartphone, and I'll tell you what upsets me greatly. It says, first from the principal, I am writing to dispel the rumors and misinformation that appears to be out in the community about the incident that happened when school was not in session on the afternoon of March 24th, School Improvement Day. I would first like to share with you the following report released by the police and printed in the local newspaper on April 1st. This is the police report, and this is what I'm appalled at, and I'm appalled that this would be regurgitated. At 1 p.m. March 24th, police reported 2 offenders, one with an airsoft, let's mark that word airsoft, rifle, and one with an airsoft handgun, arrived at the playground at Jackson School, 925 South Swain Avenue, and fired plastic pellets at the victims, hitting them. The offenders were located and brought to the school. Both were released without charges pending juvenile officer review. I will not state the rest. What I am upset about is the regurgitation of the name brand of the guns, airsoft and plastic, right? I would invite all of you to log on to Google and go see what an airsoft rifle is. It shoots 360 feet per second and has a range of 90 to 100 yards. My daughter and another 4th grade girl and a 4th grade boy, my daughter was hit with a ricochet. The other 2 students were hit directly. The boy was hit 4 times within feet. Now, the corporate toy makers would like us to believe that these things are soft, that they shoot plastic. You know, go ahead, take it to school. Your friends will love you. And I find it completely irresponsible that the police department and the principal of the school would regurgitate the corporate mantra of citing it as an airsoft rifle and a plastic pellet. Right? The one thing I addressed to the principal was that what this is clearly about is bullying. I don't know anything else to describe a bullying incident more than 2 older boys entering school property and shooting 3 younger students with guns their irresponsible parents bought them, unsupervised. So I am here to complain about this email, and I would invite all school board members, you will be disgusted if you go to an airsoft website and see what they are marketing to these kids, right? And the soft nature of this police report. And I feel that an opportunity here is being missed. 1, to address bullying for the sensitivity of the kids that commit these things, right? And 2, I am just baffled that the police and the principal would use the term airsoft. You know why they didn't? I know this buzzer's going off and I'm sorry. You know why they didn't make BB guns out of plastic 50 years ago? Because they didn't make plastics as hard as metal. Think about it. 360 feet per second and a range of 90 to 100 yards. My daughter, another girl, and another boy who lost his mother and whose father is recovering from a stroke, right? This poor kid gets shot in the butt 4 times by one of the bullies. Guess where those kids are the next day? They're at school. I'm not a zero tolerance advocate. I think it's an overreaction since Columbine that kids get thrown out of school for butter knives and Tylenol and other this good stuff. But I am appalled that, hey, a 2-day suspension wasn't in order so the parents could feel some pain, right? So you got to figure out how to get your kids supervised. I have not heard thing one from either of the parents that, let their kids, who would buy this for the first place or leave it out not locked as a Christmas present? I consider Jackson School in my neighborhood a safe haven. It should be a safe haven.
I'm sorry,
I know.
I understand your point. I appreciate you coming and sharing your concerns with us.
I just want it part of the public record because I know it'll be published, and this is an irresponsible email, and it is an irresponsible police report to regurgitate the corporate name of those weapons that were taken onto school property. They are not soft. And if anybody here, I'll forward it to the board members because, that's it. The sensitivity is for the guys that bring the guns to the school, and the kids that go and play and try, right? They're scared. And what do? We got to worry about the privacy of the kids that are unsupervised. And so I feel like there's an opportunity being missed here. This is about bullying, and this is about corporate toy companies shoving, dangerous toys down our kids' throats. And I can't believe that airsoft, that's my point, airsoft. Look it up when you get home. It'll disgust you.
Thank you. And just a general comment for all of the speakers who've come out tonight. For those who aren't familiar with our practices, we don't respond specifically to public comment in the board meeting. If there's things that fit into our agenda, there may be some address later, but we do appreciate you taking the time to come and address the board. With that, we will move on to our workshop discussions. The first item is our TIF discussion.
And as Mrs. Ostochik, as you know, you have two members of your board that were appointed to meet along with Pat Masterton and myself with City Council with regards to our 2 meetings per year with regards to TIF update. So essentially, this has been an agenda item that has been requested at the board table for future agenda items. And so I'm at this point in time, although Ms. Masterton's probably prepared with answering any questions, but I'll let the dialogue begin with Mr. Collins and Mrs. Davy.
I really have nothing prepared besides trying to do my best due diligence and best homework on the TIF structure at Elmhurst. And after doing that homework, my conclusion is that the community is won from the TIF structure. If you look at our efforts, along with the efforts of the Park District, the city, the library, we're in a partnership. We're in a partnership to make this the best community we possibly can, and in a way to increase our property values as much as we can. The school board's role in that is to have the best possible schools. And the city's role in it is to have the best possible livable city. And from my study of the TIF, we've done that. We're on our way to doing that. I don't believe the TIF has dramatically taken away from the resources of the school district. In fact, the city has released funds from the TIF district, which are additive to our tax base. You want to take it from here?
We have had several meetings with our city officials, and I would concur with what Mr. Collins said. There are 3 TIFs. TIF 1 is the downtown TIF that has been extended. It was the one that was extended an extra 12 years. And TIF 2 is up on Lake Street, and TIF 3 is around the Dominic's property area. TIF 3 is a little different in that if the EAV were going up every year, we would get 3%. It isn't a surplus distribution. It was what would you call it, Pat? I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah, the way that TIF was structured, actually, it's used as an example throughout the state of Illinois. The way when it was originally structured, that piece of property was going up at an annualized rate of approximately 3%. So the city said, well, we're going to implement this TIF district in order to increase the value of that property even faster than that. So to the other taxing districts, the school district included, you'll get the first 3%. The city will take the increased property value at anything above 3% every year. And that seemed to be a very fair deal with the school district and with other taxing districts.
This past year, they couldn't justify giving the 3% distribution because, as we all realize, we're struggling with EAVs, and I think we're going to be hearing more about that from Ms. Masterton. The TIF 1 is a TIF that has a sales tax component, and it benefits it benefits the TIF for it to for the sales tax to continue to flow into it. And when the TIF was extended, there was an agreement that the city was really giving us some money up front, and then at some point we ran the projections and they would be using surplus to make us whole. The make whole was referring to both the city being made whole for early distribution to us, and then us being made whole when it reached a threshold. And we are going to be hitting that threshold in 2013-14. And so at that point, it will be, the city will have been made whole from their advancement of about $8 million. And at that point, then, there will be an expectation that the schools will be made whole from monies that they would have had the TIF been finished in 2009-2010. So what I heard that was important from the meeting was that the city is very aware of the need to watch their surpluses carefully. They're aware of the make-whole provision, and they have every intention to be good partners with the schools in making sure that the original assumptions and the original projections when TIF 1 was extended will continue to be honored. They have every intention, and Marilyn Gaston and Tom Trezine are the city's financial people. The other thing that I think is important is TIF 2 is a TIF that has been discussed about it's up on Lake Street. Do we end it early? Do we continue it and declare surplus? And what we have expressed to the city is our budget process and how important it is for us to know if there is going to be a surplus at a time when it's helpful to us to know, so that as we're doing our budget planning for the next year, we know that we can count on that. And so I think there was a great exchange of information about our timelines and our need of when we needed to know when surpluses were going to be declared. Last year we ran into a problem. We thought we were going to have a TIF 2 declaration of surplus that Ms. Masterton originally figured into the budget. Then she had to draw it back out because the city wasn't aware of our timeline and weren't able to comply with it. But from now on out, I think that we all are aware of that. So the meetings have been very good, very productive, and I guess we'll ask if there are board questions for any of us.
First, I'd like to thank both of you for the time you've put into this and the research, ability to bring back a complex thing and explain it to us. The reason why this was on the agenda, this topic originally came up sort of in conjunction with our funding, and we did run into that issue last year. So I don't know if that was part of it. Mr. Carlquist, you had asked specifically for this. I know you had a high interest, but the entire board agreed it would be a topic for us to discuss. So I guess with that, I will open it up to board questions, discussion. Mr. Carlquist.
Thank you. I mean, this is a topic that has had an effect one way or another, or in many ways, on this district for quite a while, and will, going into the future. I'm interested. I appreciate the time that both of you have invested, and I think it's probably also just important that all board members have a good understanding of what the TIF construct is, what the agreements are that have been struck between the school district and the city, over time. I have some interest, and I'd be, on this topic from Dr. Krizik and Ms. Masterton, just in terms of, going forward, what your expectations are in terms of revenues from the city under the TIF district agreements, and the extent to which those revenue expectations are built into the budget or not built into the budget. I mean, there's uncertainty, so there's good reason in some cases not to include some of the revenue expectations. On the other hand, there are some sizable dollars that have been, if not committed, at least expected as a result of some agreements that have been made in the past. So that would be one thing. And then whether this is something, Dr. Krizik, you'd address or questions that we'd have for the city or others that maybe you could take back. But by the way, I too agree, and I think TIFs serve a useful purpose, and I think there's plenty of evidence that some of the TIF decisions that have been made in the past have proven very fruitful for Elmhurst in aggregate. And I also think it's important to note that, at least from my personal experience, the city staff has been very, very cooperative, very supportive of answering district questions and providing information as best as they can as they gaze into their crystal balls, which is a part of this, which is the uncertainty of the future, which was a set of concerns that was raised by this board a number of years ago when the District 205 board agreed to the TIF extension. Were concerns or different perspectives or points of view about what the future would hold. But clearly, there are a number of categories of questions. One is just around the surplus availability and this notion of being made whole. I think there was ambiguity when the agreement was first made, and I'm not sure I fully understand what that means or the extent to which there's, what the degrees of certainty are from highly unlikely to guaranteed of what the surplus availability looks like. A second thing I think that's important to note is that, I think, Jim, you in your comments, you talked about spending, it's, even though we have different taxing authorities and different underlying constituencies, because the city of Elmhurst is different than the boundaries of District 205, I would say it's generally congruent, but not identical. So there's a legal obligation of each governing body to represent the needs and interests of its constituency. But I think it needs to be recognized that while we talk about what's best for Elmhurst, that's somewhat of an ethereal, a values-based decision that's left for elected officials and the politics and the process to sort out, meaning there are spending priorities, and part of what brought this topic up was our discussion of what are some of the needs that the school district has for revenues, and if there were receipts from TIF, either in terms of surplus or early release of property or other sorts of things, we would have a list of spending priorities of what we might use those dollars for. We might use it to procure more technology for our use, for our students' use. We might use it to be able to hire new staff to keep class sizes at a certain level. We'd have a whole list of things that we've been wrestling with. The city makes decisions, about what to use those tax receipts for. Parking deck structures, paver bricks, and other aesthetic improvements, or developer incentives, and those sorts of things. So ultimately, it's not, it's in the hands or the authority of the group who has the say over how those dollars are either spent or released to the other taxing bodies. But I think it's important for the public to understand that at the end of the day, if it really is in the betterment of the community, where should those dollars flow? And if there's a sense that the park district or the school district might have greater needs, then that's something that every citizen, every voter should have a conversation with their elected officials about. And then the third category I think that's worth some discussion would be around just expectations of future TIF districts. Is that under consideration? Is that a tool that the city's considering today? Is it something that the mayor and the city manager and the city council would consider going forward as a way of addressing what TIF districts are intended to do, recognizing that any decision does have an implication on school, potentially on school revenues, and then how or where this district and this board would play in that process. So I don't know where we might want to start as a board, but I just thought it'd be one way to frame some conversation.
Your question was about the future revenue and how we could project that or predict that, and to be honest, it's very difficult. The city and the TIF fiscal year is April 1st through March 30th. So in essence, their fiscal year starts on April 1st. And of course, we start the whole budgeting process in May and June to try to project what revenue is. And the problem with the projection of revenue from the TIF is that they may have some ideas or plans for what's going to be happening, but they don't always know what is going to be happening. For instance, in the fall, or really in August, we found out that maybe we couldn't rely on the $350,000 that we put in the budget as a TIF distribution, because there was some thought about developing up on the Lake Street. And so they were reserving that money in case there was the decision to do that. Consequently, they have realized now by January, they had already figured out we're not going to be spending any money from January through March, so that's not going to happen, so then we will be able to make the distribution. So the difficulty there is that we have this gap between when they'll actually know when the revenue is and when we need it, and to know that. And unfortunately, they usually don't know until January or February that they can actually commit to providing us that. The good news is that they really extensively talk to us about when is our lowest cash point, which they understand as well because of being a taxing body, when we might need it, and how would it help us the best to get our distribution. And so they will follow through with that. As you know, they're going to be coming up with more than 350, something like 417,000, I think it is. And so that's really helpful for us to be getting that money at a time when the state's not sending us any money, so that it really kind of helps a little bit. The downside to the whole thing is that they'll tell us more often than not, don't budget anything. For instance, we already know TIF 3, which is the average, over the 3%. They told us out and out, this is it for now, there's going to be no money next year from TIF 3, because the growth of the EAV will be less than 3%, so we will not be seeing anything in that. We'll have discussions probably in the next month or two. I'll talk to Tom Tracine and say what's in the future. There's always streetscape. There's always some little things here and there that might eat into the funds a little bit. And we did talk to them also about any release of residential property or anything else before, property values drop any further. There's nothing. So at this point, the economy is beginning to affect the TIFs as well, and which is logical because the TIF is built on building an economy base, and since the economy is not so good right now, that makes it's logical that it would be affected. And so we're not banking on very much money at all for the next year or so. And unfortunately, because they do reserve the thought process that something may come down the pike that could be a really good opportunity, they won't commit to funds in 11, 12, or 12, 13, or whatever. They won't commit to it because they just don't know what's going to be happening with it. They do understand our process, though. They do understand that we need, that we're in a situation. They also understand the importance of a school district having a solid program for economic development as well. And so, they're trying to partner with us, and I have found them, as you've said, to be extremely helpful and trying to bring us anything and everything that they can, any information, anything else, good, bad, or indifferent. They're just right out there and open with it. And as you know, we did do our audit 2 years ago and found everything was fine. They're following exactly what they're supposed to be doing in terms of everything. And it's been a fair process to the district. What will happen in the future, I don't know. The economy right now is such that it could really affect our distributions in the future. It certainly will affect the projections that they've given us in terms of that point where we're whole, what did you call it? Made whole, thank you. Made whole, couldn't think to think. So it will affect that process because they really did figure a 3 to 4 to 5% growth every single year. They didn't project that we would have possible reduction in growth or just an evening of growth. And so that will, I'm sure when we see our newest projections, which should be soon in a couple months, they're going to be a little bit different. And of course, we'll share that with you.
The couple things. One is the whatever the amount of money is that's flowed from the TIF in terms of surplus to the school district, I think it's fair to say and important to understand, it's not a grant. It's not a charitable contribution from the TIF or from the city. It is, in fact, tax receipts, but for the TIF district and the establishment of the TIF would be flowing to the school district in any event, correct?
Yes, that's absolutely right. And no, it's not exactly what a gift, but, a less honest type of official or town or city might say, well, we want to take that money and throw it into, anything and everything rather than give it back.
Well, it's certainly within the authority of whomever the government agency is that has the authority over those TIF revenues to determine how they would choose to spend those dollars or to honor either the letter of the agreement or the spirit of the agreement that the district and the city entered into with the extension of the TIF. So that's really where my question was going is, is your office keeping this running comparison and in terms of those puts and takes? Because while I think we all share an interest in seeing a good, strong economy locally, having a good property and tax base, having the benefits of the returns of a quality TIF investments. At the same time, our funding mechanisms are very different. So while a city, for example, might be collecting is collecting tax revenues based off of an EAV, as a school district, if some of those properties or those revenues were in the base under a very completely different funding formula, which we operate under the PTEL, we might see appreciation or at least a gap between what the revenue curves look like between the two taxing bodies. So can you just elaborate on how you're tracking that and doing that ongoing accounting? Because it could get, it's one thing if the surpluses are flowing based on the projections. It's another if all of a sudden the economics have changed, and especially if there's a gap between the way the two agencies would generate revenue.
We get together with, in particular, Tom Trozine, but Marilyn as well, and see what their expenditures are going to be and go through everything that goes with that as well as their projections as to what's happening. I'm kind of paying pretty good attention to what's going on in terms of, I need to anyway, with levies and extensions, but I'm also trying to watch what's going on in terms of the property to make sure that we suddenly aren't getting a release at the lowest point possible of new growth. In other words, if we have property downtown that 2 years ago was worth $20 million and now is down to 10, I don't want them to release it until we hopefully see a little bit of recovery or know what's going on. Although it's kind of a delicate balancing act because you're kind of looking at it and saying a bird in the hand, and we certainly could use the money, but on the other hand, it's, $20 million of new growth that's straight money. It's not capped, it's straight money. So you want to make sure that they're releasing properties at a time that will be the most beneficial for the district, but at the same time that we're not starving ourselves waiting for when that property is going to be the most beneficial. So it's kind of a balancing act, and I kind of, talk to Tom about every 2 months and say, what's going on? Do you see anything on the horizon? And, to the extent that he knows, because he doesn't always know, there's just really not very much going on right now, and, they're just kind of trying to hold it together as well.
But do you have an indication that if, for example, properties values would appreciate, would increase, or saw some run-up, that there is an openness or a receptiveness to releasing those properties, or is it the plan, your expectations that the plan is to run those TIFs to full expiration?
I think as far as the, and I can't say for positive, but I think as far as the commercial aspect, they'll run it to the full one. Any commercial properties, they probably will run it to its full extent. If there's any residential properties left or any residential properties that come on there or that, I think they'll be much more inclined to release those residential properties. And that's why I had said to them, are you looking at releasing any property? Because I wanted to release them last year or, before we saw the plunge that we are seeing starting to happen, and they were not. And so, I think there's probably very little property that's residential that's falling within there. I think the only thing might be that new development at Hahn and or close to Hahn behind the gas station, it's senior citizen housing or something like that, which really probably doesn't help us a lot because of the exemptions and everything. So it's better for them to just hold on to it for the time being and keep that in there. That's really the only residential property that I know of, any larger development on that. And no, I think they're going to hold on to that as well. But I don't see them releasing too much of the commercial property ahead of time. But then again, I didn't see, or anybody didn't see all the things that have been happening here, so I can't predict.
So, Mrs. Davy, Mr. Collins, in your discussions then with the city on the other two questions that I raised, did you get any indication in terms of what the city's spending priorities are for the revenues that are generated from the TIF that might potentially come into conflict with the ability to pay out the surpluses to the school district?
The kind of two parts. You would ask a question earlier I also want to address. You asked about new TIFs that were on the horizon.
That was the third one, yes.
And we specifically talked about that at the meeting that we had in August. And they threw out some scenarios, but none of which they felt were beneficial to anyone at this time. So there were some rumors running rampant of some TIFs that were already headed out of the gate, and they confirmed to us that that was not the case, and they made it very clear that if they ever moved down the road of considering anything, it would include initial conversations with us, not even early, but that they would include us in that process. So it was reassuring to have that conversation and just to kind of hear what they were thinking, and it was some areas that you and I may not even have thought that would be considered, but it was reassuring that they let us know that they understand the impact that would have, especially if there's residential. If it's all commercial, if it's a TIF that's all commercial development, it has less potential impact on us than the residential. The other thing, the surplus. Well, first of all, to answer your question, when we meet in December, we have an annual review meeting for all taxing bodies that are within the TIF, and at that meeting, they give you the report that looks back at what the performance of the TIF had been the year before, but then there's also a sheet that gives a budget or a plan for what they would like to do within a TIF and how surplus may be used. And so we haven't seen anything in a budget that is a document that has to be filed that shows that there is any plan for, anything that would jeopardize the surplus that we're expecting. And then to that point, the EAV skyrocketed for several years, and that skewed their projections because they had projected it would take 4 years to make themselves whole from the initial $8 million. I'm going to use the word advance to us. They projected it would take 8 years for us to reach that break-even point. Well, they paced it back. So rather than take money earlier, they paced it back so that it would keep within the projections. Now we're on the other side of the scale. Now because we're seeing that the EAV is lower than the projections in the out years. And they're aware of that. And Tom Trezine and Marilyn Gaston addressed that they're making plans to watch surplus more closely because they know they have an obligation to us. You use the word guarantee. They didn't use the word guarantee, but I felt from our conversation there was a clear understanding and expectation that they were honoring what the original projections were. And do you want to?
I mean, if I can add to that, I mean, legally, they can't guarantee us. And there's some thought that legally they couldn't release that money to us until the end of their fiscal year. But conveniently, the end of their fiscal year fits nicely with, since the next month is our low cash point in the year, they can hurry up and write us that check and get it into our bank account in time. And if there is any kind of a silver lining to the dark economic cloud that hangs overhead, that the latest distribution of, I think, $434,000 to the school district, it was a total distribution of $615,000 to all taxing districts, but our share was 70% of that, comes from TIF 2 or the Lake Street TIF. And if there is a private interest in part of that property, it will require some public money to go with it. So the good news is the likelihood in the near future of any private interest in expansion or development of that property is very low. So the likelihood that we see some distribution, some cash flow from that TIF is higher for us the worse the economy stays.
I think from a budgeting standpoint, though, we can continue to be conservative with budgets going forward. And even though we have a spreadsheet of projections that we've looked at, I would anticipate Ms. Masterton not including any TIF 2 distribution in the upcoming 10-11 budget because of the uncertainty of that happening, even though, again, it's their intent to make that happen. I think we don't want to submit a misleading picture to what our budget is by including that money in there if, in fact, it may not come. I will say on behalf of the city, though, that they have a sensitivity to what our cash flow issues are and that they will always work with the release of TIF 2 to coincide within such a time where it is advantageous to us. So, rather than waiting until an end of a fiscal year or holding on to that money for any longer period of time, that money will be released sooner rather than later to us once they make that declaration that it is available, that it is in true surplus. So while we have a spreadsheet, or Pat's had one for quite some time, about what some of the projections are for the TIF 2 release, I think we're going to just operate from the perspective is that we're not sure that they're going to be there. And so rather than overestimate what our revenue is going to be, we would rather be on the side of underestimating our revenue and then at some time making the appropriate adjustment in the budget, as we normally do. And we will have to make an amended budget this year as well, because remember we took out the TIF 2 surplus when you approved the budget in September. Now we know it's going to be released, and we'll have an amended budget for you to approve sometime in June. So I think that is a strategy on our part about knowing that we might anticipate some release, but we can't guarantee it, so we don't want to, especially in a budgetary year when we anticipate our fund balances to be decreasing or going towards that declining momentum, unless we take some other action to reverse the fund balance direction that we're going in.
Mrs. Deroni?
Many of my concerns and questions have been answered by this conversation. Thank you for all of the information. I just have one final thing to add, and that is the TIF was extended. The original TIF 1 was extended in 2004 for another 12 years. It should have ended. If it hadn't been extended, it would have ended last year in 2009. We have the benefit of hindsight now to be able to look back and say, well, where would we be with those monies? What would we have received if the TIF had, in fact, ended, the TIF 1? So I'd just be curious to know if we're keeping track of that. I mean, we have the hindsight of what interest rates have been. We have the hindsight of what the EAV has been all those years, and what we would have come out at had the TIF. Because the original extension agreement did have the intent that the school district they came and told us the school district would not be losing money with this. In fact, we would probably get more money. in the long run. We would be more than made whole through this extension, and that's one of the reasons the board chose to go with it. So I don't need to know tonight, but I'm just hoping that we will at least keep track of those figures so that if there's ever any other conversation about, well, we do or we don't owe this. I understand the city right now is very accommodating, very understanding, very hopeful that everything will come out all right in the end, but I just want to protect the interests of the school district to be sure that at least we have some numbers along the way to know what it is we might have gotten or could have gotten if that TIF hadn't been extended.
I think TIF 1 was supposed to go to 2012, but I'm not positive on that. So I will get back to you on that. I can definitively say hindsight is wonderful, but if it had actually had expired at 2009, it would have been great. Because obviously 2009 was the heyday of property. So, but it was 09. Okay. So, that is taken into consideration in their projections as they go forward, the amounts that we should have gotten, and then the whole, the make whole that goes from there. But we'll go back and we'll take a look at it and see how much we would have gotten of the remaining dollars. I can get that and find out.
But without having an exact figure, what they did up through 2009 is there were properties released in TIF 1 earlier than when the TIF was originally to expire. So there was a benefit. We had a little bit of a benefit there, that there were residential properties that were released in TIF 1, again, during the time when EAVs were at a much higher rate. So that did benefit us. Having, done, unless, without doing a complete analysis, we certainly know that by 2009, we were probably in a better position than had they waited until 2009 to make any of those releases, because there was some money that was released along the way. So I don't know that those two things necessarily balance themselves out, the extension of the TIF and the early release, but I do think there is some attention should be drawn to the fact that we did get some early benefit from the release.
And I understand that, and I remember that, and that was fabulous. But does it out? Did it balance out? I'd just like to keep some bit of accounting so that we know as we go forward.
I'll keep watching on it. One thing that it should be reminded as well is the distribution or the early release of some of those properties coincided with the higher rate that we got from the referendum. So it was like a double help there, which, was excellent. It was truly helpful for them to do that at that time.
Mr. Kralquist.
But to Mrs. Duroni's point, I think we all conceptually understand which ways the arrows are pointing, right? Early contribution was helpful. Prior to the referendum, beneficial. On the other hand, had it expired in 2009, then we would be operating off of a very different tax base under the funding mechanism for schools, which is very different than cities. So what is or what will be the official accounting going forward that would show the T sheet, not so much to reflect back and focus on, in hindsight and what could have or should have or would have been, the optimal decision, but more having the right financial understanding between the city and the school district and school boards going forward around what the expectation should be on the surplus. I'm heartened by what Mrs. Davies said in terms of clearly there continues to be a desire, a spirit of support, just short of a guarantee of flowing or making the school district, quote, whole. But what is that number? Because as time goes on and players change and the economics get more complicated, I think it's really important that both parties, both organizations have an accepted spreadsheet that we're looking at, a model that would project what we think the running surplus or gap to that surplus is.
And in fact, there is one. And annually, what they do is, in December, we have our actual hearing that talks about what's been spent and what's budgeted for the future. But when we meet with them in the summer, sometimes it's August, July, June, they literally have a breakdown of all the EAV. I can request from them, and they provided for me every single year upon request a copy of all the EAVs for all the, and I have the pins of every single property within the TIF and all the EAVs at that time, and that what goes into all of those numbers on the spreadsheet. So I do have copies of all of that. They do provide it for me. It'll be another month or two before we'll get it again, and it'll be really interesting to see where we are in terms of it, because that would have been the end of the high point at that point. So moving forward now, the EAV may be pretty stagnant, and I'm anxious to see how the projections are going to change in terms of how long it's going to take to make us whole again. So, because I do think it's going to take longer to make us whole because of the fact that they're not getting the revenue in because of the reduced,
And you talked about the budget calendars and the budgeting process calendars don't mesh perfectly well. In fact, in some cases, it's very difficult on at least your decision-making, our decision-making. What's the right time, if at all, to engage in, I'll say, if we were to get to a point where the release of surplus funds, upholding the spirit of the agreement, were in question, what the right time in the calendar year is to discuss or debate the merits of the spending of, the projects. Mrs. Davy, the December list of the looking forward, here are the prospective projects going forward that would consume TIF resources that might otherwise be used as surplus dollars or used as, early release of property and the like, which would be a different kind of use of TIF dollars. Back to the original spirit of what Mr. Collins said, which is enabling the community of Elmhurst to have discussion and dialogue around the use of those resources. Everything works splendidly when there is sufficient tax revenues to uphold, to make the school district hold that agreement, and then have additional resources to reinvest in the city. If at a point in time there's conflict or there's insufficient funds to tackle both priorities, where does that fit in the calendar year, and what would you recommend, Mrs. Davy, as the right process for the public to engage with school board officials and city officials?
I think the timing is probably at the July-August meeting, because that's right in the thick of our budget process. And that's also a time when the city they're reporting their numbers and they're making their projections. And so if we knew in August, which is usually when we do know our budget issues, that would be the time that we would need to have, a conversation with the city and maybe dig in deeper if it ever came to that. But I think that's a natural time, and that's when we already have our planned meeting anyway. So I don't know if do you agree with that?
Just one additional point. Mrs. Davy, you spoke about, the rumors about a potential additional TIF. The reality is an intergovernmental agreement would need to be developed. All three of the taxing bodies impacted would need to sign off on that. Then you'd have to go through for the TIF.
No, the city, by the state legislature, the way TIFs are designed, the city, there is a process which includes public hearings, but they are not required to have the approval of any of the other taxing bodies.
It's the extension that relies on the taxing bodies to agree. The extension of the TIF does require that, and that's when you have a little bit of power to get what you want out of it. But the actual TIF itself and the formation of the TIF, as Mrs. Davy said, they have a hearing, they will solicit your opinion, but in the end, the decision is theirs to make.
We will move on. Our next item on our agenda is our strategic update. Dr. Krizik?
A little more, almost 2 years ago, we began the process of putting together a strategic action plan. And what we thought we would do this evening is basically do a little bit of a high-level overview of kind of where we are with the implementation of our strategic action plan, and talk about some of our next steps as it relates to this plan, which we see as a living, breathing document that is subject to review as it directs our work, and as we need to maybe make some adjustments based on what we've learned or some changes in the process. Just to, again, review, the action plan represented and reaffirmed and renewed our commitment to 3 very important values that we discussed at the board table, and that was high expectations, continuous improvement, and the accountability to advance student achievement. Well, I'm not going to spend time on the vision that was created or the mission that was created. Our action plan had six major goal focus areas that were each broken down into goals, strategies, tactics, metrics, and timelines. This action plan has really guided the work of the cabinet in terms of directing key work, as well as identifying what our priorities for the work have been in the last year and a half. The 6 areas, just to review them again, were curriculum and instruction, research and assessment, human resources, communications, facilities, and governance. And within each of those areas, we developed, again, goals, strategies, metrics, timelines, and objectives. What I'd like to do tonight is just to walk you through those 6 goal focus areas and talk a little bit about what some of the key accomplishments have been to date in really a relative short period of time. While there are a lot of things that are currently in place and in process, here are some of the key accomplishments as it related to curriculum and instruction. Again, the first goal being accelerating achievement for all students and minimizing disparities. The key accomplishments thus far have been the 5-year curriculum review cycle that was not only developed, but which we are currently using as the template for making decisions with regards to curriculum adoptions. The curriculum in reading and language arts, K-8, has been aligned with the adoption of new literacy series, which was certainly long in coming. We did identify an aligned curriculum sequence for science, and in the upcoming month, you will have a curriculum adoption that will come forth before you. We have provided staff development, and we continue to provide staff development in the professional learning community process. A week ago, I had the opportunity to spend a day with middle school staff at Killdeer, District 96, where this is a school that has been implementing a professional learning community process for the past 9 years. And what was great as part of those conversations with our own middle school staff, it was clear that what has been integrated in all of our conversations is that they see that the professional learning community process is the vision for the district, that that's the direction that we're headed in. And to hear that come from staff was very validating, that the work that has been done with professional development, the work that's been done at the schools with building principals, as well as the professional learning development opportunity that was at the last Institute Day, really has begun to take hold with staff knowing what our vision is. And then as part of this, one of the objectives was to look at the feasibility of instructional coaches. And currently we have implemented and we're monitoring instructional coaches in 2 schools, and those are Fisher and Churchville at this time. In Goal 3, the key accomplishments are David Smith and his staff did refresh and update the district technology plan. We have significantly improved the student-computer ratio K-12, and that has been the infusion of technology over the past several years, with the middle school receiving the most infusion of technology this past school year. And again, most of our technology purchases have been tightly aligned to curriculum adoptions. And again, I think that speaks to the collaborative work of both David Smith with curriculum and instruction to make sure that the purchases that we're making are there to advance student achievement. And again, this year, there has been a plan that has been implemented to infuse presentation technology in the classrooms. And that was done strategically, starting at 5th grade, going down to 4th grade and 3rd grade, as well as looking at which content areas of both the middle school and the high school would have the greatest benefit of presentation technology. Research and assessment, again, probably I can't say the bulk of the work has been in one area more than the other, although I think that Dr. Sullivan coming on board, looking at the goals in curriculum and instruction and research and assessment were like, I don't want to say holy cow, but holy cow, there is so much work to be done, and some of our timelines were rather aggressive, maybe a little too aggressive based on some of the foundational work that also needed to take place with regards to the implementation of some of these objectives. There were 2 goals in research and assessment, one with the comprehensive assessment system, and the second with using data and information to support decision making. One of the pieces with research and assessment that is going to affect our work is a couple things. One is that we have not yet found a data warehouse management solution system. 2 is we probably need to look at some other software, such as Mastery Manager, to look at how staff can use a system to score and grade common informative assessments and have that data easily accessible to them so they can analyze data and use it to make instructional decisions. But 3 is that we are diffusing the roles and responsibilities of research and assessment with too many people. It's not a coordinated effort. And again, fiscal decisions caused us to defer the hiring of a director of research and assessment that would have also provided professional development to staff. So we have had to augment that in a variety of different ways, and we will continue to try to augment that, but our ability to fully implement and achieve some of these goals are being affected by some additional factors. Having said that, we have begun to implement more consistent assessments in grades 2, particularly moving from the reliance on ISAT as an assessment tool to utilizing MAP assessment, as well as looking at some common summative and formative assessments, looking at using Ames Web as a progress monitoring tool, and then we are in the process of evaluating the benchmark assessments that go along with the K-5 literacy adoption to make sure that whatever assessments we are giving us data that teachers can use to actually drive instruction. And after now 2 years of implementing those, questions have arisen whether or not those are giving the teachers exactly what they need. They're not cumulative tests. We're not able to measure progress from one benchmark to the other. And so we're really looking at MAP as another tool and implementing the reading map assessment in grades 3 through 5 now for the upcoming school year. So a lot of these goals are continuously being evaluated based on staff feedback. There has been, as you know, you reviewed them, the evaluation of the REACH and bilingual ELL programs, comprehensive, very well done studies that had recommendations to be implemented beginning in FY11. And we have trend data now to show that our student participation in AP exams is increasing, as well as some of the courses developed for York next year show an increase in the number of AP offerings that are available. So again, we're on track to incent more students to take advantage of that. And then most of the work in research and assessment is doing some of the foundational work, and that's doing staff development. We have spent the entire year, and we have one more session planned, with all of the key leaders in this district. That's cabinet, that's department chairs at the high school, as well as principals, in going through a monthly staff development on the effective use of assessment, specifically focusing on common informative assessments. After our training is finished, there will be teams from each of the schools who will do a condensed version of that over 2 days, and that'll happen sometime in May as part of our, again, foundational work, developing trainers of trainers. The other piece to this is that we have not yet put this together, but we are looking to put together a data retreat for our administrators, so that if we can put our administrators through a data retreat process, they can do a synthesized version of putting their staff through a data retreat process, because we think that's going to be a critical piece. And again, that's our commitment to ongoing professional development for our instructional leaders who are also assessment leaders. And so the school teams will be provided with that staff development in May. Communications, as you recall, when Lou Gatta made a presentation several times here, he did say that our ability to effectively meet all of our communications goals was going to be one of our challenges, because the bar continues to raise on expectations for communication, and the demands for communication are going to continue to evolve and change depending on the situation as well as available technologies. Having said that, we do have some key accomplishments with regards to this, and this goal was broken up to looking at strengthening communication internal to the system as well as external to the system. With the assistance and the leadership of Nan Larup and the team she selected to participate in the district leadership team, we have been meeting now for the last 2 years on a monthly basis to address a variety of issues. That has been a really good opportunity for us to discuss what we think are some critical issues in the district, as well as get some feedback. And as a result of some of those meetings, it has led to some guidance of us taking action or looking at some things in a variety of different ways. And that has been a very a good feedback mechanism for us as district leaders, but it's been also a good communication tool for the both ways for both. The improved functionality of the website has also enabled the development of classroom and teacher web pages consistent throughout the district. Prior to that, teachers would be hosting their web pages on alternative sites, but now we have a template that's all available to all teachers, and we have professional development training to help teachers optimize those web pages. With regards to the parent community communication piece, we have utilized some web-based mechanisms, specifically feedback forms to collect surveys on information on key matters. 2 recent utilizations of that was as relate to the budget process, where we received more than 680 responses with regards to the budget process, and then the food service survey that was sent out with the results to help influence some changes in next year's food service program. We began this year to develop some quarterly PTA board meetings with key administrative staff. In addition to the monthly PTA council meetings, we are now looking at providing, let's say, an hour-and-a-half block of time with the boards of the PTAs to meet with key administrative staff, to ask questions, to go dig deeper into certain direction and actions and activities of the district. Karen Sullivan and I had met with about 45 to 50 people in February, and now David Smith and Kathy Baker will be meeting with hopefully equally the same number of PTA board members on Monday, April 19th. So that's coming up. We continue to use Alert Now. We provided some media training for key leaders in the district, and we have more fully implemented our response to intervention process, with Karen Sullivan bringing in the formation of a district-wide RTI committee that includes parental representation on this committee. Under human resources, our key accomplishments have been we have further optimized the use of our online application system, allowing both an internal and external application process. We've moved away from an informal teacher sending emails saying I'm interested in such and such a position, or leaving a voicemail message, to actually being able to use that process. The other piece to that is we're further optimizing that whereby principals are able to submit the position vacancies through that system to David Smith, which then better enables him to get those posted. And we have developed and begun to implement the exit interview process. We have increased some school and staff recognition opportunities. Again, one of the key things that we had done at the Opening Day Institute was to recognize the academic successes that staff have achieved with their students. We have provided much more intense, focused RTI training to school teams this year. That was under the direct leadership and direction of both Meg Schnorr and Karen Sullivan. And then the implementation of collaborative grade level and department teams is continuing to be further developed, with some schools, grade levels and departments operating at higher levels. But again, everyone moving in that common direction. With regard to facilities, we have begun the process of identifying the essential classroom materials, supplies, furniture, and equipment. And I will say that this year the Cabinet has taken, on a monthly basis, we each go into a school, and we each have a different role and focus in terms of what we're looking at when we're going into schools. David Smith and Pat Masterton are specifically looking at how a space is being utilized and how equipment and supplies are being utilized, so that we can get some first view on what is further needed. There was the full implementation of the Raptor V software system for visitor identification. Initially, that began with a grant that some schools received, and it was only at, I believe, Sandburg and New York had begun, and now it's fully implemented throughout the district. There have been 2 parent forums on heroin in the fall of 2009. We've developed at least one additional safe and secure entrance at Emerson with the building construction process, and then the school crisis plans continue to be updated. Again, David Smith's department has worked incredibly hard when they had updated and revised the 3-year technology plan, which was approved last spring. And there is a system that is in place to monitor technology support performance. And in his report that was made last month, he has shown how that the customer satisfaction and technology support has continued to increase over time, which again speaks to some of the systems they have in place. And last but not least, board governance. We continue to make progress on our work in the policy manual. But some of the key accomplishments as a board that you have done is you have adopted the budget within timelines. You have achieved financial reporting recognition at the national level for the first time. That happened in 2009. For the 3rd consecutive year, you have achieved the highest level of financial recognition from the State Board of Education. And collectively and individually, you have participated in local, state, and national professional development opportunities as you, as leaders of this district, show the importance of what professional development means to moving this district forward and in keeping continuous improvement at the forefront of what it is that we try to do. Our next steps, we have several next steps, which is no surprise, more work for a lot of the Cabinet. But that is to reevaluate the timelines for the objectives and make some necessary changes. So we anticipate in the ensuing months to come forth with some changes and modifications to the existing strategic plan with rationale for why we would make those changes. We need to, again, as part of that, reevaluate those objectives that are necessary to achieve the goals. And we do believe that we need to add some additional objectives as well as eliminate some objectives. For example, one of the objectives was to have curriculum maps in place. Our direction has shifted, and that is a direction of developing power standards in each of the core curriculum content areas. That is foundational work necessary for the further development of common formative and summative assessments, as well as for us to take the further step of identifying some performance indicators, which is a concept that all staff became familiar with on March 1st. This is a big document. I don't want to say it's too big, but it's big. In order to keep staff, as well as us, focused on what are our key essential priorities in this strategic plan, we need to figure out a way of reducing this to a plan on a page. And so for the upcoming year, we're going to need to identify what our key priorities are so that we stay focused on that. And I anticipate those to be primarily in the area of curriculum and assessment, curriculum and instruction research and assessment, because we are doing a lot of maintaining our facilities at this time. We are doing We don't have a significant human resources initiative that we're launching, so the most of our work is going to be in curriculum assessment for the upcoming year. So how do we reduce that to a page so that we can simply communicate that to staff? We had a meeting the other day, and one of the comments I'd said is that I generally don't speak in simple sentences, or I don't write simply. I write in long 65-word sentences sometimes, and it can be complex. And as the union president reminded me, the staff is just looking for something simple. And so that's what we're going to work towards, putting together something simple. And again, we need to remain focused in our work in all 6 goal areas. That includes the board staying focused on the governance piece. And that, again, I can't continue to stress that it isn't going to be critically important in the year ahead, considering the available resources that we have, that we continue to align our time, energy, and resources in working to achieve the goals of this plan and not to go off course. In some cases, we've gone off course a little bit this year in terms of the time that we had spent with regards to putting some of our fiscal priorities in place. While that is always an underlying goal that we have as part of the district, it wasn't a key driver in this strategic plan. So again, balancing all of those is going to be critical. So those are our next steps. And hopefully sometime in the summer, we'll come back with what some of those anticipated revisions are going to look like, and then what that plan on a page concept might be looking like as well. So again, our goal was to just do kind of a high-level overview of this today for you.
Mrs. Davy.
Dr. Krizik, thank you for that presentation. I think that as we have just finished a very difficult budget process, reduction process, having this roadmap of our strategic plan, I don't think we can stress the importance that we had something in place, because I think that it helped us make good decisions of where we could make reductions, knowing that we had already declared what was important to us through our strategic plan. And what I heard from people in the community was, there's certainly an understanding and an empathy for the budget reductions, but they also wanted to know that we were continuing to move forward in things that were important to advance our district, to keep our children being challenged and moving forward academically. And so I think that having this document and using this document even through difficult budget process has been critical. And so I know that a lot of work went into putting it together, and as you said, it's a living, changing document. So what I see is that you're going to continue to make changes and modifications as needed.
To that observation, Mrs. Davy, that is why we have been so protective of professional development money in terms of as we're going to move forward. That some districts, the first thing to go is professional development money, which really sometimes thwarts your ability to move forward with the objectives that you have set forth. And we do know that we have a lot of foundational work to do. If we're going to be asking staff to develop power standards, we need to provide them with training on how to write power standards. If we are asking our staff to utilize common formative and summative assessments, then we need to have training on what that should look like, as well as then how to use the data to drive instruction. So that has been key, and that's why the recommendations that the administration had brought forth to you, many of them were tied to what the goals were that were outlined in the strategic plan. So thank you for making that observation.
Just maybe to piggyback on Mrs. Davies' comments, I think it was not only important that we have the strategic plan in place. I mean, you refer in here to some of the training. I mean, some of the programs I've gone to, the districts that don't have it in place are trying to figure out how to get it done. So, again, I think the investment was wise. I think it's important that we continue to have these updates and monitor and reprioritize and, focus our resources. We may not be able to do everything in some years, and other years we may be able to make more progress. But the design of the plan was to look long-term strategically, look at the vision for the district, getting input from a lot of the community members, teachers. I mean, it was pretty comprehensive. So I appreciate you taking the time to give us the update. I think it's going to be important to continue. The only way this happens is if, we set specific goals and we set dates for that to happen, and then we measure how we're doing on that. So just one overall question. I mean, you talked about some of the things in here being very aggressive. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, the communication plan back to maybe the board? There's, very specific tactics and deadlines that were laid out. How will, as those are altered and we focus them a little bit, maybe push some deadlines back into the future, how will that communication come back to the board?
Well, as you know, the cabinet reports that you receive, as well as the principal reports you receive, are connected and aligned with the strategic plan. So you are getting a lot of information that way in terms of some of the work that is being done, so that we have not transferred all of that cabinet report to the updating of this, which is work that we need to do. So for the past year, again, all of the information has been aligned with the strategic plan as it relates to the cabinet communicating with you. We now have to take that and take all those cabinet reports, so to speak, and make some adjustments and modifications to that. And so, again, what I anticipate, again, is bringing forth a document later this summer with some revisions of some of the timelines. Not because we are pushing things out, not because they're not important. It's because there are other key pieces that they're connected to that may not yet be accomplished, or that were not delineated in our objectives at the time that we had written them. But again, a fundamental shift is moving away from curriculum maps to power standards. That affects, that kind of has a domino effect on a variety of other of the objectives contained within this document. So, and then what we would do is then we'd repost and update this on our website. Now, this PowerPoint presentation was posted today, and I believe copies were made available this evening, and we'll post that to the website too, so people can at least see on a high-level version what some of the key accomplishments are, so that they know we're continuing to stay focused on the strategic plan. And again, that does continue to be, formulate our agendas for administrative meetings, and it continues to formulate the work of cabinet members going forward.
Can you just elaborate a little bit more on what power standards are and how we've sort of shifted our focus to that?
Dr. Sullivan?
Power standards are called different things in the literature. Sometimes essential learning targets, sometimes essential understandings. It's really taking a look at our standards, state standards, and now we're looking at the Common Core standards because those are out for us to look at, and really looking at what is essential, what's enduring, what do students really need to build upon for later learning. Because as been documented in the literature, teachers cannot teach every standard that we have out there. Students would be in school, I think the equivalent of 22 years is what's out there in the literature if we really did that. So districts that have really had some great success have really taken a look at what are those standards, have really make critical decisions about what are those power standards, or whatever term we want to use for them, so that they know teachers have a very clear idea of what their target is for students, and so that students have a very clear idea of what their target is. And then build your assessment system, your curriculum around those. And those are things that can be easily or well communicated to parents. So there are a number of districts that have that available, so parents have a really clear understanding about what I expect my student to learn in first grade in this subject area, what I expect my student to learn in 8th grade in this subject area, what I expect my student to learn in, English 10. So that it's very clear, and students are very clear. So it's the foundational step to really, what do we want our students to know and be able to do? Did I make any sense at all?
There were two workshop topics on our agenda, the TIF discussion, which we didn't have any handouts because that was more of a table discussion. Also, the strategic plan update. If anybody that's here would like to come up and ask a question or make a comment about either of these two, you have the opportunity now as part of this workshop discussion. Okay, we will continue on our agenda to Superintendent's communication, the 2009 levy.
And Ms. Masterton's going to review for you what the 2009 tax extension is going to be. She's really going to show how accurate her projections were when you approved the levy in November, how really close on target, and what the distribution of that tax extension is going to look like for next school year. So, Ms. Masterton.
Well, first of all, let's talk about what is the difference between the tax levy and the tax extension. I know that you as a board know what that is and what the differences are, but not everybody does. And so let's just talk about that. In the fall, we passed a levy for property taxes, and the levy and we passed that levy with more, asking for more than we expect to receive. The levy is the amount of property taxes that we ask for. But on March 22nd, we received a breakdown of the amount of property taxes that will be extended on our behalf. The extension is the amount of taxes we expect to receive. Our first distribution, as you know, of the 2009 property tax extension will be received on or around June 1st of 2010. And then the second half is normally on or around September 1st of 2010. So here's the news. Our equalized assessed valuation is actually dropped from 2008. In 2008, it was $2,659,000 and some change, and in 2009, it has dropped approximately $6.5 million. It's a 0.25% drop in EAV. The new growth, what is even more important to us, though, is our new growth in 2008 was $40 million. Our new growth in 2009 is almost $24 million. That's a $16 million change or drop, and that's about a 40.58% decrease in new growth. Just to give you a little breakdown of how it affects us or where it fell in all of that, the EAV changes for our townships in DuPage County show that the residential in York Township went up almost $4 million, and in Addison Township it went up about $3 million. So our actual increase was in the range of about $6 million, or a 0.32% increase in the residential property EAV. Where we're really hitting and where we are seeing the economy change definitely is in industrial, commercial, railroad and farm, and actually there's really no change in railroad and farm, so it's really in the industrial and commercial where we're seeing a literal 3.05% drop or decrease in EAV. And, you know, that doesn't mean that, I think basically what that means is businesses are going out of business, and that's the effect that's coming from that in there. Our new growth came about through basically residential. 97.76% of the new growth was in residential. Only 2.24% was in commercial. There was zero in industrial growth. York Township took the 78.67%. That's a pretty even break between what we have in EAVs between York Township and Addison Township. So that was basically even growth there between those. So how does that translate? Here's our extension estimates that we made in November. Now remember, this is not the levy. This is what we estimated the extension would be. We estimated that our grand total would be $88,131,413, and that we would see a 1.04% increase in the extension. We would receive about $829,158 more in our regular levy or extension, and with bond and interest, it would be about $1.2 million. We expected a drop of 74.5% in our growth in extension from 2008 to 2009. Our final extension that we've received on 322 translates to $88,188,295. It's a 1.45% increase. Our regular extension increase is 1.01% instead of the 1.04. We're seeing an additional $803,547 in regular, and our extension increase in bond and interest is $1.25 million. Our growth in extension is a drop of 73.3% from 08 to 09. So we were pretty close in our projections. So here is the new property tax extension. We're seeing, and these are the percentages on the side of how much of an increase. And as you know, in our regular funds, not our bond and interest one, but in our regular funds, we do have the ability to move monies a little bit where we need it within our capped rates. And so, as we always do, we always try to maximize our ed fund as much as possible without compromising our other funds. This year, because of what was going on with the state and the lack of funds that have been allocated for transportation and remitted for transportation, we chose to maximize our rate as much as we could for transportation. So a little bit more was put in there, which accounts for the 5.62% increase in transportation. We took some of that money from working cash and kind of distributed from all the rest of the funds evenly. So that is the only reason why we would have had, that large of an increase. So altogether, again, 1.45% increase, and our actual rate will be $3.32 and change. That's an approximate 5-cent increase in our rate. 4 cents in our regular levy, 1 cent in our bond and interest. That's directly because of the fact that when your EAV goes down, your rate is going to go up. So, that's the reason for that. It doesn't necessarily translate into higher tax bills. So much of that depends on what your assessment is as well. So, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Mrs. Deroni.
It's not a question, it's just a comment. Thank you. It's so clear to understand what's going on when you present this data in this way. But when I looked at it and I looked at the other information you gave us, it struck me that the CPI could do whatever it wants, but if the EAV is going to drop on us, we're still only going to get a little bit more money. I mean, we're so worried in December about what the CPI is going to be, and it came in pretty favorable considering what it could have been, but the EAV dropped. So here we are, getting less than we got last year in terms of new dollars that we can put toward the education of our children. So
that's true as far as the new growth is concerned. That's our major decider. We'll always get whatever the CPI, that's the one thing that we can always count on getting, is whatever the CPI said. So if there's a 1% increase in CPI, we can count on a 1% increase in the amount of dollars that we're going to be receiving. But the actual money that we really get that's above and beyond, that really helps us the most, is new growth money. And because that's full on rate. So in other words, when new growth comes on, the EAV, it's full on rate. Whereas what ends up happening when the CPI is higher than your EAV growth, regular EAV growth, is that's when your rate actually increases and your EAV growth goes down. And it doesn't translate necessarily to a higher bill for anyone. It just gets kind of redistributed out.
I guess maybe just one additional point there. When we talk about the incremental revenue from the CPI, I mean, that is probably the easier formula to figure out because it's just the additional dollars. Really our big, as you said, our biggest variable on the EAV, I mean, that's the piece that you're not going to control. You're not going to be able to predict into the future. There could be no growth. So you get to a point where really your increase in your CPI becomes it. So, I mean, what we're seeing is, we're still fortunate we have growth in this community. Our problem is that we have to forecast how much additional revenue we think we're going to get, and based upon that, that's how we set our budgets. So when our EAV comes in lower, and maybe that's, to the TIF conversation, when we're looking at the surplus money, the timing of when it comes isn't as important as understanding what that timing is. So if we know, great that we can get it on our lowest cash balance, but as long as we can plan our budgets, we have the ability to manage through that. When we don't know whether it's coming or whether it's not coming, and we plan for something that doesn't happen, that's really where we're going to get into trouble. So, I think, again, back to the TIF conversation, I think the great communication that's gone on is going to help us. Hopefully we will continue to see some moderate growth, at least in this community. But, again, to reiterate Mrs. Duroni's comment, thank you for this information. I agree, it's very clear, easy to follow. Okay, I think we're going to actually have a reasonably early evening tonight. We're going to continue on our agenda. If I can get back there on my little... Our next item is the consent agenda. Are there any items that anyone would like? There's only one item on the consent agenda. So is there any board discussion, or can we go ahead and carry it through as a consent agenda item? Okay, we will present it as consent agenda. May I have a motion, please?
I move that we approve the superintendent's consent agenda.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mrs. Conroy. Mrs. Walsh? No, we don't need to have a voice. Okay, Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Ms. Conroy?
Yes.
Mrs. Davy?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Ostachik?
Yes.
Mr. Kalquist?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes. 7 ayes, no nays, that motion carries. Our next item is upcoming meetings. We have 2 board meetings scheduled. The next meeting is Tuesday, April 27th. That'll be a business meeting at 7:30 here at the District 205 Center. Following that, we have a meeting scheduled on May 11th. Again, 7:30. That will be a workshop meeting, 7:30 here at the District 205 Center. Do we have any board communications? Mrs. Davy?
Just a couple of things legislative related. And I apologize if this was already announced, but the state of Illinois did not get the race to the top money. The 2 states that got it were Delaware and Tennessee, and there was a lot of talk about it at the national convention, and whether we even won it. So I think that the one speaker's comments was, if it comes around to you, just say no. So I'm not saying that that's what our position should be, but I think that Illinois is positioned to possibly be in the running for round 2, which is going to be, I think, awarded in June. And so I will look forward for additional conversations about the whole race to the top. And the other thing is the No Child Left Behind is, you're going to start hearing a new buzzword, and it's the ESEA, which is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And that is the act now that is in Congress being debated. And it's a kind of a substitute for No Child Left Behind. It would be the replacement of the new version of where No Child Left Behind is headed with a new administration and new generation, if you will. And so I think we all need to stay tuned and stay plugged in as emails go by of this ESEA Act, this bill, because as we all know, NCLB had significant and severe impact on individual districts, and this bill could as well. And so I think we all need to stay on top of that.
Mrs. Duroni?
I know we had no discussion on the consent agenda, but we didn't even say what it was, and it was the approval of the health and dental insurance plans, and I know a lot of work went into getting that together and done with the union and the administration, and I just want to say thank you. It came in at a rate that we had said we could live with, and we certainly can, and I just wanted not to let that go without a statement. It was good work.
Mrs. Davy.
I don't need an answer right now, but I would like to hear the process for adopting our policy manual. I'd like to know where we are in it, what our timeline is, and I know we're not quite finished. But also embedded with that is, how is it going to be approved? Do we go with the old policy and what the requirements are to approve new policies, which I think the answer is yes. So I would like to have at some point a clear understanding of how the new manual, once we get to that point, is going to be approved. I think we all need to think about it.
I guess what I would first do is throw that to the policy committee to come up with a recommendation, and then we as a board can come to a consensus on that. Any other board communications? Seeing none, I will accept a motion to adjourn. Moved by Mrs. Conroy. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. DeRoni. All in favor? Those opposed? This meeting is adjourned.